Hello and welcome to another episode of Q&AI. Today we are joined by Crispen Thompson. He is the founder of Leadership Studio. Welcome, Crispen. Maybe give the audience a little bit about your background and what we're here to talk about today.
Great. I'm super happy to be here, Bob. As you mentioned, I'm the founder of the Leadership Studio, which is a sort of a leadership coaching, leadership consulting firm based here in San Antonio, Texas, but we cover the full country. But prior to this, I had a great career at Hewlett-Packard Enterprise. I was there for 25 years, in fact. And the way I tend to describe it is that I grew up there both personally and professionally and had a great opportunity to do a lot of things there along the way. I started in sales and moved into sort of field ops and then into strategy and planning and ended my career kind of running incentive operations for the partner network at HPE. And for me, it was one company that was bought by another, that was bought by Compaq, that was bought by HP, and then HP split. So a huge amount of churn and change, and forever grateful for all the opportunities that personal and professional, right, that I had there, and had the opportunity to kind of see the world change around technology. And then after HPE, I went to a company called Taskus, where I ran their North American operations, and then went to a company called QSC, where I ran sales enablement and supply chain transformation, so other cool things along the way. And like I said, about a year ago, decided that I was at an inflection point, and that this thing that I always loved doing, coaching others and kind of getting people to reach their full potential as a leader, was something I could just do. And so here we are. Yeah, I think it's been a great journey so far, and I'm super excited, especially the momentum the last few months have been just amazing for me to kind of really build traction and feel like I have something that I can do more than just talk about. So it's really great.
Okay. Well, you know what? I have to say, working with executives sounds a little bit challenging. But I'm kind of interested now. All these executives are talking about adopting AI, leveraging AI. I'm curious. In your work with these executives, are they actually walking the talk? Are you seeing the leadership of these companies actually start to leverage AI in their daily job?
So I'll talk about the good, and I'll talk about the challenge that I see. So the good is, I don't think I've worked with any executive here in the last, let's say, 8, 10, 12 months that isn't using AI. So that's fantastic. Now, I say that because they all are using it. They all have some, they have Grok, or they have Claude or ChatGPT or something on their desk, and they talk about how they use it. But when I kind of delve into how are you using it, maybe how are you encouraging its use, around your company, that's where the waters maybe aren't as clean as I would like them to be. Because, like a lot of people out there, I think what AI could, would, or should do for an individual, for an organization, for a corporation isn't as well understood as we would like sometimes, which gives me a great business opportunity. But I also think that what I see is there's a fairly high percentage of pretty senior executives that are using AI as a search tool, right? It's in lieu of Google. And I think that's good, right? Sometimes in the sense that it gives them more familiar with capability and gives them context, but there's risk, right? A lot of the GPTs and things don't always give you the results that it should. Depending on what you ask for, it may give you results that in fact don't even exist, right? This, and I hate this term, but the hallucination of the GPTs, right? The way they make up stuff, right? So sometimes that happens, and so what then gets into is, okay, well, how do we get executives to kind of pull themselves, their organization into along the trust curves? Now, there's a small percentage, small but increasingly vocal percentage of executives that are seeing the real potential, and they feel like we're maybe past the early risk stage of investing time and capital in these areas. And those organizations, they're not just using AI as a new search engine. They're not using AI as a kind of just a fancy little aside or graphics creator or whatever these things I've seen them do. But they're thinking about how do they make their organization more AI competent and AI ready. This term of AI readiness, I think, is something that I'm seeing more and more lately. And what's interesting is these are big tech savvy companies, right? That you would expect them to be fully embedded adopters, and maybe they've been a little hesitant for a lot of good reasons, but now they're jumping in, but they're seeing they need to get themselves ready. There's a huge data component. if you want AI to really run well in a corporation, data's got to be there.
Any great success stories? You're working with executives. Any words of wisdom for the executives out there where you've seen AI actually help them in their daily job beyond just search?
Yeah, so at my last company before running the leadership studio, the CEO there was maybe the biggest, most passionate, most vocal adopter of AI that I've encountered. I don't think you could have a conversation with him that AI didn't come forward. And so he was really, really proactive in pushing it across the company, showing us as leaders how we can use it. He was very, very open about it doesn't have to do everything for you, but you should make sure it's doing something for you. Find the tasks that it could help you with, something rote or repetitive, let it help you with. Very, very easy examples were, let's have AI help us with things like writing about the beginnings of an employee review, or you write an employee review, let it evaluate. So, are we getting to write meaningful, actionable points? I think there's an 80% positive there. I think there's a 20% risk, right? Because people could start to recognize what feels like it was written by the AI, and so you might lose that kind of personal connection in that kind of specific example. But we had AI embedded across the company. He was championing an organization within the company to help train people on AI, what it was and what it wasn't. And he was very, very open about this is going to change jobs. Maybe not take away jobs for that company, but change where people spend their time and all that. And so I think it took a lot of fear away from individuals about what might be coming with AI, at least in that company. So I thought that was really good. Very, very passionate player.
Yeah. So, that's an interesting topic, right? I think, with all the recent technology layoffs, the question is that economy or is that AI driving these layoffs, right? If we look at most technology transitions, it's usually been, we create more jobs than we eliminate. Or, with AI, there's a scenario where actually we eliminate more jobs than we create. Which camp are you seeing any signs of AI actually eliminating jobs?
I think so. On paper, yes. I think in practice, what we're seeing is that some companies feel like it's coming, and for whatever reason of timing, that now is the right time to let's go ahead and reduce heads in advance maybe of the AI technology truly taking over some of those roles. I also think we see other things. Whether fully accurate or not, I was reading a lot of reports about. I think very famously, we all saw Amazon here in the last couple of weeks just lay off tens of thousands of people, right? A huge number around the world, and people were speculating that this was about AI already taking jobs. But if you kind of dug into it, it was more like it was incidental to AI. AI, as they're expanding on the AWS side, they're expanding their AI investment. They have to put a lot of capital into the hardware side of all this, the chips and things, and they needed the money. Even as companies as big as Amazon, right? They needed the money to go and invest in the area. And so that's one area I saw where I think it's impacting some of these decisions. I also think that for many companies, companies that are in growth, I don't think it's necessarily going to take away jobs, but I think it's going to slow down headcount growth, right? Anything operational, anything repetitive, you should look like AI should do this for us, right? Why would we want to go down that route when we could have the machine, the bot, whatever we call it, do it for us? But then the good executives are the ones that are kind of opening their eyes and having that conversation with their teams, their organizations, but they're also looking at, if that frees up this time, what else do we do? Because every big organization I've talked to always has this list of things they've never been able to do because they never had the time to do it. And hopefully AI can now free up that time for those things.
Yeah. So any sense, when you're working with these executives, I've heard numbers like, hey, we're going to get 20% more efficiency leveraging AI. And I think there's some truth in that. You look at engineering and writing code, you look at marketing, creating content, you definitely can see that AI is going to be helping people do their job quicker. Any sense on, 20%, 30%? How much efficiency gains do you think the executives are expecting or actually seeing with the, adopting AI?
I think 20% is a real solid number. I think it's not that's not hard to take that leap at all. I think 20, 25% in certain areas, right? I think that there's for sure to see that. But again, that doesn't or shouldn't necessarily translate into a 25% headcount reduction, right? That may be a 10 or 5 or even a 0% headcount reduction, depending on the trajectory of the business, right? Because if they're growing, maybe the headcount stays flat, and you add capacity with AI. And again, I think right now we still don't fully understand the eventual capabilities of AI. You talk about content creation. That's all over the board, right? With AI in terms of, because every time I use AI for content creation, for every one time I get something that blows me away and I'm amazed, I get 2 or 3 where I have to just pull my hair out and say, what's going on here? This is not what I asked for. It's not exact. And so I think there's that too.
Where do you see AI actually getting traction? I mean, in what part of the companies do you think AI is getting the most traction or the most return on investment right now? If you look at engineering, sales, marketing, operations, supply chain.
I think operations, supply chain, marketing, I think those are reasonably lagging fruit in terms of the ability to create efficiency or create scale in the early days. Because, like in marketing, as an example, that there's a lot of repetitive activities. There was a lot of kind of content creation that could be done with little or no human touch, right? So long as you train the AI appropriately. I think on supply chain, there's a lot of action, right? That you can, so long as the AI understands the right rules, you're letting it do, like self-optimization around scheduling. I think there's a huge opportunity there. We were using AI just to do something simple like create the way for executives to ask questions, so they wouldn't have to be quite so knowledgeable about tools. The AI would sit in between, and they could just ask real language questions about which orders didn't ship and why. So instead of having to get analytics delivered to them, they could get a response. So I think those are areas. And then in operations, I mean, anytime you have companies that are doing finger to keyboard type work, right, to do things around, whether it's an order or an invoice or a payment, and things that follow a pretty prescribed set of rules and can be handled with a minimal amount of, like, that should be AI all their health.
Now, I always ask my guests,
yes.
Have you done the Waymo Uber experience yet?
So I have, in fact, at the company I went to after HPE, we did direct support for Waymo. So my people were the ones driving the cars if the car got stuck, right? So on behalf of Google, right? We were directly working with them, and I've ridden in the cars, and I'll tell you the interesting thing is, this has been a couple of years, so I'm sure everything's gotten better since then, as everything does. My experience then was, first of all, it's very surreal being in a car. That's when you're in the back seat and it's just driving on its own. That is very surreal. Second, I thought it took turns too fast. And I'm a guy that enjoys cars with power, and I'm okay driving fast, but I felt like it took the turns faster than I would take them, especially in the minivans. Okay.
Because I'm always curious, what made you trust that at some point, because this is the discussion around the adoption of AI, and, where are we, what's stopping us from adopting AI faster? But you jumped in, it sounded like this was your job. You had no choice. You had to get in that Waymo Uber.
No, I mean, I certainly had a choice, right? I didn't have to. I could have. This was in Chandler, Arizona, where one of the test sites for Waymo was, and so I could have done anything. But I wanted to try it. I wanted to see how it worked. And of course, now they're in Austin. Now they're in San Antonio. They're in all these places. I see them driving around all the time, and I've also ridden in cars like Teslas that have the kind of semi-autonomous piece, and so I'm pretty trusting and familiar in that. Now in Tesla, it's different, because if you feel it doing it wrong, you just grab the wheel. In Waymo, you're in the back seat, you can't grab anything. Right. Maybe you can try to bail out the door. But yeah, it's not a.
Now I have to ask you, the Waymo Uber, if that Waymo Uber gets stuck, does it call home? Is there someone watching that car all the time? Or
yeah. So I presume today, just like it was a few years ago. So I have a full team of people that were constantly watching the cars and could be there. And if you were stuck or you felt like the car was stuck, you could hit a button and a human would come on board inside the car and say, "Tell me about the problem," and they can see all the cameras that are outside the car and kind of figure out what's going on. Okay. Ideally, although you can't always, right? And now we've seen a lot of stories here recently. I think the first, I'm a big believer in that technology. I think it's the future. Don't mistake any of my comments here as a negativity, because I fully believe in it. But we still see things like there was a story just a couple weeks ago of one that misinterpreted the stop sign on a school bus, and it ran past a school bus that had its stop sign out. Oof! Imagine what could have happened. That would have been terrible. So
yeah, I still think a better safety record because. But I think this is a good opening to the adoption of AI. When I talk to people, when they got in that Waymo Uber, everyone has a slightly different experience on what made them decide it was okay or they trusted it. If you look at our enterprise customers now, where do you think they are on the adoption of AI? They seem to be much more skeptical. They're happy to jump in a Waymo Uber, but they're a little more skeptical of adopting AI in their business.
Yeah, I mean, for sure. I think we would all be willing to put our personal safety at a minor risk of a fender bender versus rolling out AI that could potentially affect a quarterly result or something. I understand that hesitancy. What's interesting is I don't run across any company, any executive that isn't saying we're adopting AI. Every single one is saying it. To a degree, every single one is saying it because they feel like they have to say it. I mean, it's the popular thing right now, and if you don't say it, right, it's you're seen as a Luddite or anti-technology or something, and so I see everyone saying it, and I see everyone. If I say, well, how are you using it? Then they can point to something. They can point to I have ChatGPT on my desktop, or I use Grok every night when I'm on Twitter. So there's things to kind of give them proof points. But if I push further, okay, but what are you doing within the company, and then how do you know it's right? That's where you start to move from practical to theoretical and hypothetical, right? And okay, well, here's what we're thinking about doing, or it's 2 quarters away. And sometimes those conversations are fantastic, right? Because it's a great way for us to talk about, are they making the right steps? Are they thinking about the right tools? Are they getting themselves ready? And I mentioned this before, right? But if your data is not set up in a way to be used, then AI is going to make you make bad decisions much faster than you could with people. And I think that's an important, maybe underappreciated element, is how much you have to think about the rules you're setting up, what the data structure, how structured is it, if it's unstructured, that's fine, but you have to tell it that it's going to be structured, and then make sure you go through that process of training. I think it's maybe too much. Some companies are saying we roll the AI out and it's perfect in day one, but it's like any other set of employees. They need to be trained. We need to watch for what behaviors occurred. If it's rules based, that's where you truly figure out how much of your work falls outside of the norm. I think that's been a really big eye opener for a number of executives I've talked to, is see how much of their kind of standard work is falling outside of standard. And you see that when you turn on an AI to start doing that work, and you realize people are picking up, or people are touching way more than you thought they would.
Now maybe I'll pull out my mirror here. I mean, so you recently went from big company to consulting, executive coaching business. In your own little business now, big AI adopter, leveraging AI in your own business yet?
Yes. I could not run the Leadership Studio without AI. We have some pretty simple things, like we have a leadership assessment that we roll out that we ask people to kind of take, and it's something similar to like a DISC or a Myers-Briggs type thing, but it's kind of rooted in our own fundamentals. And how that's scored, I mean, I could do the work, I could go through and score it, but I have AI pick it up and do the scoring, and then I also have it do comparatives. So like, as we started to see people from different industries and different things, let it kind of come back, report to me, are we seeing more of this type of archetype versus this? And just, not that I'm doing anything with that yet, but it's giving me data to be interested in. And then on the coaching side of my business, I actually built an AI that goes along with my coachees. So once we start coaching, I give them access to this tool, which is called Studio Coach Lite. The non-Lite version, I feel like, has been perpetual development with me, but we'll get there eventually. But Studio Coach Lite gives the people I'm coaching the ability to, in between sessions, to ask questions. Okay, this is coming up for me, or I have this conversation I need to work through. Help me talk through some examples, or because I put a premium on communication as a way for executives to elevate themselves and stand apart. That's a lot of where the AI stands in. So they can say, oh, I'm giving this presentation. They can load it up. They can make a recording, and they can analyze, how are they hitting, give them pointers around, here's a speech pattern you're using. You can detect, repetitive motions, or if they're hitting point too often. So it really, again, I can't, it's literally in between sessions. I don't touch that at all. And I've gotten just overwhelmingly positive feedback on that. And so I couldn't run the business without AI.
Now I'm curious because I've done a couple startups, and I've brought executive coaches into the executive team to try to keep everyone get to know each other, Brigmeyers and extroverts, introverts. So is most of your work one-on-one, or do you actually startup teams, big teams?
So I think probably just because of my networking background, I have probably maybe let's say pretty close to 50-50, maybe it's a 60-40 split between individuals and groups. And it's mostly from bigger companies. And that's not necessarily by design. It's just where I found the business, and I'm going to go where the revenue is, obviously. And so for individuals, it's maybe people that are seeking to elevate themselves or really focus on differentiation or career acceleration or executive presence, these things. And then for companies, it's a little bit of my sweet spot would be like a cohort style, come in for a week or something, get a bunch of high potential executives and kind of help them elevate their game over a few intensive days, and do, weeks or months of follow after that. But also increasingly now being asked to do things like, come talk to us about AI, come talk to us about maybe the things we're missing, help us see ourselves a little bit, and just kind of hybridizing a little bit of consultant and coach kind of action in there. And it's been super interesting so far.
Yeah. So now I also heard that you're an author, a recent author. I guess the title of the book is Emotional Intelligence in the Age of AI. Did I get the title right here?
Yeah, it's the Human Advantage, which is around emotional intelligence in the age of AI. It's just maybe a month or two out there in the world. And it's funny because I didn't start this by saying, I want to write a book. What I started was, for maybe the last 10 years or so, I've given various talks and things on emotional intelligence, and I wanted that to be part of my toolkit with the Leadership Studio. And I kind of felt like maybe I hadn't put enough thought into this, because if someone came to me and said, I want to pay you tomorrow, I felt like maybe I was exposed. Maybe I didn't have enough meat there to kind of go. And so this started as an exercise for me to just collect my thoughts. And then I realized this is more than just thought collection. This is something I could put together, and perhaps someone else would like it. And, when I teach, it's not a hugely long read. It's meant to be something that's instructional, and you can kind of use it. And it's for anyone that's a leader. But the point of the book is not about people are better than AI or AI is better than people. It's that AI is here. We have to use it. And as leaders, we need to be thinking about, how do we, in the age of AI, how do we keep being human? How do we keep our people from, going to burnout? And as we think about AI, the differentiating factor is AI can do almost anything we ask of it right now. But we, as people, are the ones that can decide, was that right, or was that important? Was that relevant? And I think that's the focus of the story, is how do we not forget that, at least right now, where AI still has some limitations, we still, we as people still have a lot to offer as leaders, and bringing other people along this journey, whether it's about AI or not.
And when you look at leaders, what do you think? I always talk about IQ, EQ, what do you think? Most are leaders, high IQ, high EQ, high both, or what does it carry? You look at the leaders you work with, I think there's kind of this theory that, hey, to be a CEO, sometimes, you have to have a little bit of a psychopath in you, right? You have to be a little risky.
Sometimes. Yeah, I think sometimes, I maybe psychopath is a little extreme, but I think that, what I see is people that are coming to me tend to be higher on the EQ side, because they're already seeking to improve themselves. And I don't think you get that without already kind of having EQ as a relevance. My experience is, there's no one there's no one definition of a successful leader, right? I think we would like them all to be competent and reasonably high on the IQs. And I think, first, right, so we will rise to the level of their own competence at some point, right? So IQ will bear out. But then in certain organizations, certain situations, I think EQ can really make a huge difference. And it's, again, there's no one recipe. I think a certain company in a certain situation needs someone with a lot of EQ. If there's a lot of turmoil and change, or maybe there's been some sort of massive industry disruption, you might need EQ just as much as IQ from that CEO to help guide and shepherd the people through. I think we look at someone like Elon Musk, right, who's famous for just working nonstop and holding his people around into these kind of incredibly tough work schedules. And I'm not convinced that EQ there is something that is as high for him as it needs to be, but who can argue with the results, right? And so I don't think there's any one recipe. I think it's, as we look at leaders, we need to figure out where do they need to be in that moment. I would like everyone to think about EQ, but it doesn't mean they have to have it in every moment, every situation.
Any words of wisdom for up and coming leaders? People looking to move up into CEO, VP status. Any words of wisdom? What personality traits or what would you offer them to work on?
I think it starts with introspection. I think if you're unwilling as a leader to look inside yourself and kind of figure out where are you strong and where do you need to grow, then you're already creating self-limitation, right? I think that's, if you have to be willing to be introspective. And I think, and again, this is a core competency at the Leadership Studio, but I think being able to focus on communicating your ideas, and broadly, that means up and downs, I think that's a great way for leaders to differentiate themselves, distinguish themselves in mixed conversations, but also start to create kind of loyalty behind them. Because if people feel like they're not just spoken to, but heard, then it's a great way to have differentiation. And of course, don't say no to any of the kind of challenges around you. Find ways to work through them, work past them. How do we get it done? I think that kind of attitude goes a long way.
So should our leaders have any concern that they're going to be replaced by AI anytime soon? Where we get to the day, hey, this AI is making better decisions than my average VP?
So I think at certain layers, what's going to happen is just like every other portion of every company, AI is going to start to create scale. Do I think we're going to have an AI VP anytime soon? No, not likely. But do I think that we're going to be able to create larger organizations under fewer leaders, because AI is going to be able to pick up some of the slack? It's going to be able to create scale even for leaders, even for like very subjective type things. Absolutely. That's in the next 2 to 3 years, right? We'll start to see that. I think we'll start to feel that. And then of course there's the other side, which is as leaders, as AI and like, let's say the digital workforce begins to become expansive, leaders need to learn new skill sets. How do you manage an operation that is maybe 15-25% people and the rest is being run by digital? Because you're not managing those digital people, right? But you still have to manage the outcomes. So you maybe need different skill sets on head up our different, alerts and things. So how do we watch for these things to be successful? Because again, AI can make you fail much faster too. And I think that's the piece that leaders have to be willing to look out for.
Well, Crispen, I want to thank you for joining, and I would look forward to reading your book, Human Advantage. I want to thank our audience for joining today and look forward to seeing you on the next episode of Q&A AI.
Thank you much.